A big part of reading is understanding what is important about what we read. We call this reading comprehension. And today we are going to learn a new strategy that helps us determine the importance of what we read. I brought with me today an example that will help us remember how we determine importance in reading. So the example that I have today is a bag of candy. Well, what this bag of candy does tell us on the outside is that it's Starburst. So that gives us some information about what type of candy that it is. But we really don't want the wrapper on the outside. That means really nothing to us. So on the inside, we have a piece of candy, but it's still not exactly what we want. So this little wrapper gives us more information because, again, it tells us it's a Starburst, but it also tells us what flavor we're going to be eating. So that's more important. Well, it's still not exactly what we want because we don't want to eat the wrapper. What we want is the piece of candy on the inside. This is what we're after. This is the important. This is the yummy candy. Okay? So keep this in mind as we learn about the importance of reading, or determining the importance in reading. So we're going to use a couple of examples using our candy to help us remember a couple of things. So when we have big wrapper words, these are words that don't really add anything to the story. And a couple of examples that we have are the, in, and a. The next thing we're going to talk about is little wrapper words. These are words that, they're more important because they're words that describe the noun or the verb. They're adjectives and adverbs. An example of these adjectives are small and tall. That gives us some information, but not a lot. And then other examples of adverbs are fast and slow. Again, that tells us some information, but doesn't give us a whole lot. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is little wrapper, or candy words. Words that are the core of the story. These are our nouns and our verbs of the story. So example of some nouns are man, house. That tells us a lot, like it's a boy and a house. So that tells us a lot. Examples of verbs are lives and runs. So that tells us a lot of what's going on. Okay, so now we're going to look at a couple of sentences that will help us put this into action so that we can further use it in our poem today. The tall man lived in the small house. So the word the, well, that really doesn't give us a lot of information about what's going on with the man. So that's going to be a big wrapper word. Now we move on to the word tall. Now the word tall, it does describe something a little bit more. It kind of tells us that it's a tall man. Okay, but that still doesn't tell us a lot. So that's going to be a little wrapper word. Now, the word man, that tells us a lot of information. That tells us whether it's a boy or a girl. So it's a boy. So we know it's a man. And then, so that's going to be a pretty important piece of our information. So again, that's going to be a candy word. Now the word lived, so that tells us what the man is doing. So lived is pretty important because now we know what's going on. So that's going to be another candy word. In the small house. Now we're going to look at the word in. It tells us a little bit, but not a lot. So again, that's going to be a big wrapper word. Now, we have the word the again. So the word the doesn't really help us again. We have the man lived. Okay, that tells us a lot, but the word the, not so much. So that's going to be a big wrapper word. Now we have the word small. Small, that does tell us something. But does it tell us the man lives small? How does a man live small? That doesn't give us a lot of information. It gives us some, but not a lot. So, that's going to be a little wrapper word. Now we have the word house. So the man lived house. Well, that tells us a lot. So that means the man lived in a house. So that gives us a lot of information. So that, again, is going to be a small candy word. Okay? So we now know the man lived house is the core or the information that we wanted to find out. So now that's what's important. Next thing we're going to look at is another sentence, really quick, just to review what we just talked about. Okay, so we have the word he. So that tells us a lot of information. So we have so we have a candy word. He likes. Likes tells us what he's doing. So he likes something. To drive. Well, to doesn't really give us any information. It's kind of just there to connect the sentence. So drive. So he likes to drive. Well, we know that drive gives us a lot of information because it tells us what he's doing and what he likes to do. So drive is a candy word. Now fast, yeah, it's important because now we know he likes to drive fast, but not so important. So that's going to be a little candy word. In, well, I mean, that again doesn't describe a lot. So that's going to be a big wrapper word. His car. So we know now, this is his, again, that tells us who it is. So it's going to be a candy word, car. So now we know car is important because he likes to drive his car. So what we know from this sentence is that he likes to drive his car. Yeah, now we know that he likes to drive his car fast, but that really doesn't matter to us. So what we know is he likes to drive his car. That's important. Okay, so keep this in mind as we move on to our first poem. And the poem that we're going to look at today is out of this book called Recess, Rhyme, and Reason, a collection of poems about school by Patricia M. Stocklin. So, the poem that we're going to read today is And the Answer Is. Teacher, please don't look at me. The answer is a mystery. I'm staring into empty air. I'm sliding underneath my chair. I'm making myself very small. I wish I wasn't here at all. Teacher, teacher, pass me by. Please pick on some other guy. Teacher, teacher, call on me. I know the answer, can't you see? This one's a rap, a snap, a breeze. Just look in my direction, please. I'm almost bouncing off my chair. I'm waving both hands in the air. Teacher, teacher, ask me first, 'cause if you don't, I think I'll burst. This poem is by Carol Diggory Shields. Alright, so now that we've read our poem, we're going to look at a couple of we're going to try and figure out what's important in this poem. So, the first thing that we're going to look at is I'm going to bring up a bunch of words that are going to be our candy words. And so, we're going to be able to see what's important from the sentence by the boxes that are around the words. These represent our candy words. The words that are unboxed are our big wrappers and our little wrappers. While they help us with a lot of information, they're not that important. They're not what we want to know. Okay, so now, the teacher. The teacher is a pretty important person because without a teacher, you really don't have a class. Please don't look at me. Well, please doesn't really matter, so that's going to be a bigger little wrapper word. Don't look at me. Oh, so that tells us a lot of information. That tells us that the person, me, he or she, doesn't want the teacher to look at them. The answer is a mystery. The word answer is again a candy word because the person, he or she, the answer is a mystery. Well, for them, that answer is unclear and they don't know what's going on. So that's kind of important to us because now we know that the person, me, he or she, they don't know the answer. I'm staring into empty air. Well, okay, so now we know that the person, me, he or she, is staring out into the air. Well, into empty air, we don't really need to know that the air is empty. I mean, it's important because it does something to describe the air, but it's not really information that we need to know. I'm sliding underneath my chair. Oh, well, that tells us some information. That tells what me, he or she is doing. So they're sliding underneath their chair. So that gives us some good information there. It means they're sneaking down under. I'm making myself very small. Well, small really doesn't tell us, but he or she is making themselves do something. So that's important because we want to know. I wish I wasn't here. Oh, well, that tells us a lot of information. That tells us that me, the he or she person, They don't want to be in class right now at all. And so then we go back to teacher, passing by. Well, it tells us a lot of information. That tells us that they don't want the teacher to notice them at all. Pick some other guy. Again, they want the teacher to move past them and pick somebody else. Now we're going to go into the second part of the poem. So the first part gave us a lot of information about the me, he, or she person. They really don't want to answer the question. So now, teacher, call on me. So now we've got something else going on. But now we have to notice, is the person in the top part of the poem the same person in the bottom poem? Did the teacher move on to another question and now they know the answer? That's something we'll have to figure out. Teacher, call me again. Okay, we have the teacher, and we noticed that they were in the first part of the poem, so they're still important. Call on me. Well, now, the me, the her, or him person, they may be a new person, or they may be that same person. I know the answer, can't you see? Well, now they know the answer, so they're excited, and they want the teacher to know that, so that's something that we kind of want to know. Now, there's ones that rap, a snap, or breeze. Well, this one, they really know the answer to the question, and they think it's pretty easy. So that's kind of important to know, because instead in the first poem, they wanted the teacher to pick somebody else, because they didn't know the answer. Or maybe they did, and now it's a new question. Look in my direction. So they really want the teacher to pay attention. So they're going to do some stuff to get the teacher to notice them. I'm bouncing off my chair. Well, that tells us a lot of information now. So in the beginning poem, they were sliding underneath their chair. Now they're bouncing off their chair, or it's a new person. I'm raising both my hands in the air. So now we see that the teacher, or that the he, she, or her, him person is really excited and wants the teacher to know by raising their hands in the air, and they really want to take notice. That's important because now we know this person really wants the teacher to take notice. Teacher, ask me first. Oh, so now we know that this person really wants the teacher to ask them. Because if you don't, I'll burst. Well, what we find out is that they're so excited to know the answer, to tell the answer, that they're gonna burst with excitement. So now what we have to talk about, after we've gone through the whole poem, is we know that the teacher's important. We know that the me person's important. We know that in the me person in the first part of the poem, he or she doesn't know the answer to the question. And then we know that they're doing a bunch of stuff to make it so the teacher can't see them. So that's pretty important information, and we want to know that information because it helps us figure out what's going on in the poem. So now in the second part of the poem, maybe the teacher moved on to the next question. We don't really know. We have to kind of figure out if that's what the poet is asking us. So, or is it a new person? So is there one person speaking, or is there two people speaking? So now in the second part of the question, the person really knows the answer, and so they really are doing a lot to get the teacher to notice them this time, versus in the first part where they were trying to get the teacher not to notice them. Okay, so with all this in mind, we're going to talk about another poem that is not going to have our candy words as helpers, so we're going to kind of have to figure it out on our own. So after looking at all this, this gives us a good idea of what's important in a poem. It doesn't have to be the same all the time because poems are always different. But this gives us a good idea of what we're looking for. Okay? So now we're going to move on to our next poem called Summer Shift. And I'm going to go ahead and read it, and then as a class we're going to talk about what's important, and then after we talk about it, tomorrow I'm going to have you guys write a paragraph, or I'm going to have you guys do a mind map about the poem, about this poem, so that way you can get your mind thinking about what we're learning, and you're going to be able to draw little tree branches to help guide your direction. Okay? So here's this poem called Summer Shift. We packed our bags in June. I braced for a summer of impossible goodbyes and the dread of living without friends ever again. To chase away the fear, I flipped through a dictionary, plucked out the word hush, and I thought about the whisper of the wind, rustling through the leaves, come next autumn, the silence of their falling, Then I jumped into them, a soft, deep pile of them, grabbed an armful of red, gold, and burnt orange beauties, tossed them in the air, and I was all right again for a while. And I went back to packing for the move. Okay, so let's look at this poem. So what do we know about this poem? So we know that it's probably the end of summer, because we see that from the word summer. We packed our bags in June. So that means that something's going on. So they're probably either moving or they're going on vacation. So now he or she braced for a summer of impossible goodbyes. So that means that she's probably pretty sad about leaving her friends. So she's the dread of living without friends ever again. So she's really worried that she's not going to see her friends again. Is that what you guys think too? So those are our candy words. So friends would be a candy word, and we packed our bags, or so we would be a candy word because that tells us like who, so that means there's more than one person. And then I, so that is part of the we, so now it's only one person. And so now we're going to look for another candy word to chase away the fear. Fear sounds awfully like a candy word because that might be important. So obviously the person I has some fear. So let's find out what that fear is about. So is her fear living without her friends? I would think so. I flipped through a dictionary and plucked out the word hush. So it looks like now she's trying to figure out how to chase her fears away because she's going to miss her friends. And so she's looking for words that will kind of help bring down these feelings that she has, or he has. I thought about the whisper of the wind rustling through the leaves come next autumn. So now he or she's thoughts are going on to something else. They're thinking about this next season coming up. So that's kind of important because we know that they're thinking ahead. They're thinking to next autumn. So autumn would be a candy word. So that's kind of important. So now we know that that person's thoughts are taking them to next autumn. So that's important. It's silence as they're falling, and I jumped into a soft, deep pile of them, grabbed an armful of red, gold, and burnt orange beauty. So that tells us that in autumn, he or she is going to be jumping in a pile of leaves, and they tossed them in the air, and all was right again. So what now we see is that they were remembering their thoughts of autumn and how that makes them feel better. And so what that does is that helps them, again, chase away that fear. So that fear and those thoughts of leaving their friend, thinking about autumn made her happy. He or she happy again. And kind of helped shift some of that stuff. So that's kind of important to see in the poem that she's relating past good memories to what her feelings are now and that made her happy again. He or she happy again. Now, so then for a while, and all was right again, for a while I went back to packing for the move. So now all of a sudden we bring it back to their leaving in June. So that means they're going away. And now she's packing again. So that tells us a lot of information. So we know they're packing for a trip, whether they're moving. Well, it tells us they're moving. So now we know that she's sad or fearful about leaving her friends. And we know that in the fall, she knows that she'll be better again because the fall makes her happy. So what we see from this poem is we see a few things. We see fear. We know there's a move. We know that the person likes the autumn. So from these things, what you're going to do is you're going to make a mind map of what's important in the poem to you, what you think is important. Okay? And that's concludes our determining importance in poems. And next time we're going to talk about determining importance in paragraphs and sentences and chapters as a whole. Until tomorrow.